Hello, this is Mr. Gideon. Today we're talking about what economics is about. Economics is the science or the study of scarcity. So what's scarcity? Scarcity is the condition where our wants are greater than the limited resources available to satisfy them. Scarcity is the basic economic problem that confronts all individuals and societies, where essentially there are enough resources, there's enough stuff across the world for people to get what they need. But there's not enough stuff for us to all get what we want. We have unlimited wants for limited resources. We can't all have a mansion. We can't all have a car. We can't all have the lifestyle materialistically that we might envision for ourselves. So for this reason, economics is defined as the science of how individuals and societies deal with the fact that wants are greater than the limited resources available to satisfy those wants. Typically, the way that it's addressed is by having some kind of rationing device, a way of deciding who gets what and how much of it. You could say the nicest cars go to the biggest, strongest people, or they go to all the people that have blonde hair and blue eyes. Or, which you're familiar with, you can use a rationing device like money and a pricing system to communicate the value of goods and services in the marketplace, and use that as a way of deciding who gets how much. The more money you have, the more stuff you get. Another example comes from my childhood. Raise your hand if you've got a sibling. Go ahead. I'm watching. Alright, now, if you've got a sibling, chances are you've disagreed about things over time. Maybe you've even fought over limited resources, like food that you both like. Well, when I was a kid in the Gideon household, we used to fight over food sometimes. My brother, who's 4 years younger than me, and I sometimes would see leftover cake, for instance, and the parents would say, all right, so who wants cake? We both would say, we want cake, and there wasn't enough for both of us to get the amount that we wanted. So my parents had to come up with a rationing device. Well, they did something I thought was pretty brilliant. They said, okay, fine. You, kid number one, you're going to cut the remaining cake in half, or just cut it into two pieces, however you want, and the other kid gets to choose whatever piece he wants. As you can probably imagine, what would happen most of the time was the cutter would be as perfect as possible in their effort to try to cut that remaining cake right down the middle. Because the second kid, the chooser, is going to most likely choose the larger piece of cake. So that was a solution to scarcity within the Gideon household growing up. But when we're looking at these kinds of situations, it's important to understand a couple of key terms before we ever get into the larger models and theories of this class. Exchanges and trade-offs are a very useful concept. Exchanges and trade-offs are the process of giving up one thing for something else. It could be money, it could be time, it could be opportunities. Which brings us to another important concept, opportunity cost. If you have a bunch of possibilities that you might have to trade for your top choice, those are opportunities that you will not be able to enjoy, take advantage of. Specifically, opportunity cost is your second ranked choice, the most highly valued opportunity or alternative forfeited when a choice is made. You could even think of it as the number one ranked trade-off. So, for example, you didn't have to take AP Economics. It's an elective. And if you're taking it over the summer, in particular, you may have given up some kind of opportunity in order to make time to take this class. You could have worked a paid job. You could have taken a different class instead of taking this class. There's a whole host of options that you probably considered. But if it came down ultimately to taking AP Economics online or working a paid job, that was your second ranked choice, then that's what we refer to as the opportunity cost. If there was a conflict there and you had to pick one, and this is what you picked, then you gave up the opportunity of working a paid job and putting away some money for the summer. So opportunity cost is a very important concept in this class. And the people who are most efficient are the ones that can try to minimize costs, whether there's a monetary value to it or not. We sometimes call this thinking in terms of decisions being made at the margin. It's useful in this class to have a dictionary, a thesaurus, which you can kind of use specifically for this class to accumulate interchangeable terms. And so this is not something that I'm going to provide for you through the notes, but it would be very useful, especially because on my tests, and more importantly on the AP exam in May, we don't know necessarily what terms are going to be used. So for instance, in the case of margin or marginal, a synonym for that would be additional or extra. And that's something that I would start off my thesaurus with if I was you. But decision making in terms of the margin has to do with weighing additional marginal benefits against marginal costs with respect to whatever situation we're looking at. So, for example, how much time during final exams week are you going to be using to study for one test versus another? You probably know through common sense that if you spend all your time studying for one exam, you're not going to do well on the other exams. So the question is, when do you start to get to the point where the cost of spending an inordinate amount of time studying for one test starts to outweigh the extra benefit of each additional minute, each additional hour that you spend studying for that test? That's an example of making a decision at the margin. The most efficient people are the ones that are able to, on a regular basis, weigh these things. They might not be walking around in life saying, okay, now I'm in a new situation and I'm going to be weighing the marginal cost versus the marginal benefit in this situation, but they kind of do this intuitively. There's probably been situations you haven't realized, but you've done this yourself. But you ask yourself, so how long should I be doing this? How much money should I be putting into this? How much of my limited resources should I be contributing to this activity? Even though it's designed to meet my needs, I know that this is not the only way to meet my needs. So, for example, bending down to pick up a coin. If you're walking from one place to another and you see a quarter on the ground, will you pick it up? If you see 4 quarters laying in close proximity to each other, will you pick them up? Probably, most of you. But what if you see 1 or 2 pennies in close proximity to each other? Maybe not. You might be saying to yourself on some level, it's not worth the extra effort to bend down and pick those pennies up off the ground. If you're my age, I'm 40 now, it's not just a cost in terms of time, but in terms of pain as an old guy, bending down and picking up those pennies. So you make this decision for yourself, and there's no right or wrong. It just depends on the person's personal preference. If you're Bill Gates, one of the richest people in the world, and you're walking to a conference, maybe you're going to be giving a lecture, and they might even be paying you thousands and thousands of dollars to give this lecture. Is it worth being a couple minutes late to bend down, if you're Bill Gates, and pick up a couple of pennies? Probably not. You make that decision at the margin to just continue on. But the right amount of anything is the optimal or efficient amount for that person, the amount for which the marginal benefits equal or exceed the marginal costs. So ultimately, as you realize this, it brings us to this acronym. There is no such thing as free is a concept represented by Tinstaf. Tinstaf. Tinstaf means there is no such thing as free, or some people refer to this as there's no such thing as a free lunch. And that's really true if you stop and think about it. If somebody says, you know what, I love you, and I don't want these tickets that I have to a Dodger baseball game to go to waste, so I'm going to give you those tickets. Is going to the Dodger game with those free tickets truly free? Perhaps not, because you still have to pay for gas to get to the stadium. Chances are you're going to have to pay for parking on the stadium grounds. Let's say you're somebody that has such a great friend, they decided to comp you for those 2 things as well. They said, no, and I really want your day to be free, so here are the tickets, here's gas money, and here's money for parking. Is going to the Dodger game that day truly free? Well, once you get inside, you might be thirsty the 2nd or 3rd hour of the game. You might be hungry, in which case, at that point, you might have to buy something from Dodger Stadium. Think about the free bobbleheads they give away, or free, hats or jerseys as a promotional item for people to get them to the game. Are those things truly free? Well, in the big picture, that's a marketing ploy where the Dodger organization is hoping to recoup that cost they put out there, because they know once you get there you might be buying other kinds of products, food, drink, or otherwise. But even if all of that is provided to you at no expense, let's say you're a real master at being able to save money and try to get things for free. You're like my wife, for instance, who is able to get free tickets, gas, and parking, and then smuggle food and drink in her knapsack into Dodger Stadium. Is it still truly a free event? No, because the time and the effort and the energy that we took to go to that Dodger game has a cost attached to it. There's something else that we could have done. And whatever the second ranked choice was, qualifies as our opportunity cost. So, now that you know this, I can induct you officially into our Royal Order, the Royal Order of Tinstaf. The Royal Order of people who have been taught this class or understand this concept of there is no such thing as free. Now, when we do this pledge, I do want you to raise your hand, because I can see, I'll find out at some point, even though you're listening to this online, I'll find out whether you did the pledge the way you're supposed to. I want you to raise your right hand and repeat after me, but before you do, understand that once you're a part of the Royal Order, there is a signal that we recognize each other with when we do see each other in the physical space out there. And it's a sign of an X. Most of the time we cross our arms in front of our chest to signify a couple different things, besides the fact that we're members of the same Royal Order of Tinstaf. As it says here in your notes, there's a couple of levels of significance for the X. First of all, the X refers to the fact, reminds us of the fact, that there is no such thing as free. Somebody says free, you give them the X, and you remind them, well, there's not really anything that's free in this world. There are hidden costs in everything. Also, the sign of the X across our chests is a reminder that we love economics. As a matter of fact, if you know a little bit of sign language, like I do, very little, that is a symbol of love. Thirdly, we're always mindful of the laws of supply and demand. If you look at a market, like I've got pasted here, that shows a supply curve and a demand curve, they cross and form the shape of an X. We'll come back to supply and demand later. But let's get to our pledge. All right, raise your right hand. Go ahead. All right, good. I state your name. Do solemnly swear to remember the laws of demand, the laws of supply, and that there is no such thing as free for the rest of my life or for as long as I live. So help me God. Congratulations, everybody.